I want to bring in my panel now, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. He's a retired Marine Corps reservist and the CEO and founder of KIP, a strategic risk management firm, and Rabbi Marc Schneier. He is the president of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. Rabbi Schneier, I will start with you. I just want to get your response to what Ehud Barak said, that essentially pulling out of the deal, the U.S. pulling out of the deal, means that Iran still reaps the benefit of the deal because the Europeans are in, and then a couple years from now, Iran could break out of the deal and said, well, the U.S. broke out of it first.
I applaud President Trump's decision, and I'm coming from the perspective in terms of bringing peace to the region in the Middle East. I believe that President Trump's decision to back out of the Iran nuclear deal is going to bring Israel and the Gulf states closer together. And as your correspondent just referenced before, what we heard today from the Kingdom of Bahrain was truly historic. Yesterday, the Saudis, UAE, and Bahrain applauded President Trump's decision. Today, the Kingdom of Bahrain actually supported Israel's decision to go after the Iranian missile sites in Syria for an Arab Gulf state to take such a public and to make that kind of pronouncement, I believe, is truly historic and a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it is certainly unusual. Hal, let me ask you this. There are some that are saying that the reason Iran is attacking Israel is because they're retaliating for the U.S. to pull out. Do you think it's that, or is this just an escalation of the tit-for-tat between the two countries?
Well, Shane, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little escalation of the tit-for-tat, but the other thing is, you got to remember, Iran, the government, it's not as completely unified as it looks from outside. There's different factions. There's hardline factions. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, which owns the Quds forces that were hit in Syria, that tends to be a faction that's been many times opposed to Rouhani. And what I think was this was them sort of flexing their muscles. Now, strategically, this was a really dumb move on their end because they hit the Israelis. They hit Golan Heights. That's Israeli territory. And I'm pretty sure the Israelis had this plan already in place for a long time on exactly all the sites. They didn't say they hit all the targets, but they kind of walked it back and said, well, we've hit most of the targets. And as a former target intelligence officer, I can tell you that there has been a lot of work behind the scenes of strike packages and how to do this. So this kind of backfired on the IRGC. Of course, the other part is I'd point out that business confidence, investment confidence in Iran has plummeted. And so there's a whole economic side of this thing that has to be appreciated.
The point about Israel coming out ahead of Iran in this case is a fair one. But, Rabbi, let me ask you this. Iran controls Hezbollah, and the last time there was a war between Israel and Hezbollah, that was extremely painful for Israel. So Iran may use Hezbollah to go after Israel.
They might, but again, I see that we're living in very, very wonderful and exciting times. Who would have imagined 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the possibility of the President of the United States, the State of Israel, and the 6 Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others, coming together and supporting this initiative to back away from the Iranian nuclear deal. And I believe that as President Trump pursues his dream of the ultimate deal, that this is a step in a very positive direction.
Hal, this is a fight between Israel and Iran, but it seems to me that Russia is really key here.
Russia plays a major role in this whole thing. Of course, they have their huge presence in Syria, and that's where they can cause the most disruption. That's where they could actually cause the most military problems, if you will, that we would run into. But there's a point to be made here. Interestingly, with this move, you see the entire Gulf coalition, for the most part, and Israel all on the same side of this issue involving Iran. That's an interesting alignment to the point where you see, Bahrain basically publicly coming out and supporting this. And then you saw the comments yesterday. This, having spent quite a bit of time in the Persian Gulf, this is unusual to see this public side of it. But the other side of it, too, is Israel's looking at the long game, as are we. Where are we going to be in Syria, not just today, but 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years from now? And we're looking at Russian influence. We're looking at Iranian influence. And I think there's a little bit of orchestration going on to set the seeds strategically of where we want to be in the future.
And the question is, how much is America willing to go in and invest in Syria to actually have some leverage? All right, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, Rabbi Marc Schneier,